Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mid-Atlantic CCDC competition. I'm here with the director of the Cyberwatch Center, Casey O'Brien, and also I'm told you like to be referred to as the El Jefe of the event. Welcome, Casey.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
So, Casey, I wanted to preface this next segment with everyone gets hacked. I mean, the clients that work with me, people call me up and require services, friends of mine. You see it in the news all the time. Our own websites are under attack constantly, and everyone has an incident of some shape or fashion, whether it's not such a big deal, everything to, oh my God, we need to stop everything. I think what really defines you as an organization and defines you as a security professional is how you handle the breach. You can't go forth in this game of computer security and say, I'm never going to get hacked. There's never going to be an incident. That's just not realistic. You have to go into it with a mindset of, okay, somewhere someone's going to penetrate my defenses. What do I do? How do I handle that? How did it happen? Go back and pull it apart. How do I shore up my defenses? And how do I move on and make sure this doesn't happen again? And then refocus and say, well, now I got to go back and look at the bigger picture and focus on all those other things I was doing. It's a very difficult job. Casey's here to tell us about, along with some other very talented folks, to tell us about an incident that happened on the Mid-Atlantic CCDC website. Is that right, Casey?
That's correct, yep.
So tell us a little bit about the incident.
So 2 weeks ago, I get an email on a Monday morning from a colleague of mine saying that the Mid-Atlantic CCDC website is serving up malware. And it just so happened that Monday morning was the morning we announced the 8 schools that were advancing to the region finals here. And so having access to close to 50 professionals that are part of our red team, they play the hacker presence, to help me do some analysis was an absolute benefit. So
So just to clarify for our viewers out there, someone put something on the website so that when you visit the website, your computer would contract malware.
Right. So all I knew was that our website was serving malware. It was something called Smart Fortress. It was fake antivirus software. And basic.
Yeah, the friends and family contact us all the time. I'm sure you've had the same thing. They say, oh, this website was being so helpful. It told me that I had this virus, and all I had to do was, pay $10 for this software, and I gave him my credit card number, and I installed it. But really, that antivirus software is a virus or malware.
Exactly. So at that point, I enlisted our red team members and asked for some help in doing some analysis. And I'd like to bring them up one at a time and talk a little bit about what it is that they actually did, what tools did they use, how do you go about doing analysis, what were the ways in which the attackers compromised the site, some time frames, and then what we did to try to clean it up.
Yes.
So first, let's bring up Brad Bowers, please. Hey, Brad.
Welcome, Brad.
Brad.
How you doing?
How you doing? So Brad was one of the first people that responded on that Monday. Brad, what were some of the things that you did in your initial analysis when I reached out to the red team?
Right, so the first thing we were trying to do is get an environment set up so we could actually look at how the website responded to our traffic. We used a specialized machine using some backtrack and something called Burp Suite. So basically when we would go to the website, we would see what's being fed to it via code, and then try to look at that code to get an assessment if there was anything in it that looked malicious. Now on the first day, when we were running it, we really didn't see anything that came back. In fact, going to the site directly, we noticed nothing that looked or was being served up as malicious code. And I believe we responded back too saying, hey, from our perspective, it looked really good. I guess it was the second day where things started to get a little bit more interesting. We're like, hey, it depends on how you actually got to the site or where how the site was being served up to you that was causing a problem. And that was really where I think some of the other analysis went on. From my point of view, we kind of stopped there. I know some of the other folks were really starting to dig in at that point.
So what were some of the techniques and tools you used to do analysis? So certainly you don't want to use your own system, a production system, to do some analysis, right?
Exactly.
So how do you go about doing this?
Exactly. So we basically built a machine that's completely designed just for forensics work. And it's a backtrack box where we can actually look at all the processes that are running. We take pretty much a snapshot of that when we start it up. And then we look to see what kind of files are changed, what kind of files are requested. And we use a product called Burp Suite that'll actually run through, look at all the data that's in there, and we can actually see all the traffic as it's going back and forth, almost like an IP trace.
Now, did you manually review each request coming back to the web? Because Burp lets you, as you make a request to the website will send you data back. Burp lets you kind of stop and say, okay, you can look at this and you can accept or reject that request.
Yeah,
So you guys manually looked at every
Exactly, it
response
just
coming
kept on
back.
hitting accept as it would keep going through to see where it was going on. Because a lot of the websites are so dynamic now, right? They're pulling data from all different places. So we wanted to see if it was one unique spot that was serving up bad code, or if it was the page itself. And that was as far as we went on it for that point.
So at that point, you felt, what was your final analysis at that point then?
At that point, we didn't see anything was being served up malicious that we were seeing from going to the site directly. And it wasn't until the next day when you had said it was depending on how you accessed it that things started getting a little bit interesting.
Okay.
And I think some of the other guys really dug into that.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brad. So you must have been, you didn't panic, right? Because we tell the blue teams not to panic, and I hope you have learned from all, as I'm sure you would, seeing all the blue teams panic, that you were completely calm, cool, collective through this whole process.
Yeah, I think I was the poster child
That's
for
good.
completely calm and cool.
That's good.
But
Other than throwing the office chair in the hallway.
yeah,
but, you know.
yeah, and, yeah. It was absolutely stressful because it was the day in which we announced the
Yeah,
8
so you
regional
were-
winners, right? So I knew
It's
I knew
never
there was-
good timing when
never.
incidents happen, right?
Never good. I knew there was going to be quite a bit of traffic going to the site.
Yeah.
But I felt confident after talking with Brad and a couple of the others that that the site was in fact not compromised. And I actually at that point went back to my colleague and copy and pasted snippets of what Brad and some of the others had done in the way of analysis. And at that point we thought that the systems that my colleague had reported to me had already been compromised. And it just happened to be when they went to the Mid-Atlantic site that they got this message about you have antivirus and whatnot, which turned out not to be the case. So up next,
we want to bring the next guest from the red team on?
yeah, let's bring in Justin. Hey,
How's it
Justin.
going, guys?
Welcome, Justin.
to see you. All right.
So, Justin, you were part of the day one analysis. Can you talk a little bit about what you did and what you found?
Sure, absolutely. So I did a couple things concurrently at first. I obviously went to the website in a controlled environment. Brad spoke a little bit about how you would do that, virtual machines, etc. Went to the site, checked some packets, basically looked at the actual traffic to see what was being shown in the actual network data. And nothing was showing up there. So we did some other things. We did some scans on the actual site using some open source resources, using some antiviruses that can actually scan websites, so it actually goes through the code, verifies that everything looks legit. That came back clean as well. So the next thing we did was some manual analysis on the JavaScript files, because that's one of the key places that people will put malware. The payload that they'll be delivering will typically go through JavaScript. And so antivirus isn't going to catch everything. So we manually went through those. All of those came back clean as well. And so that's when the initial analysis, the 15 minutes that we spent doing that part, the initial analysis was maybe the site's not compromised. In fact, maybe the clients were already compromised when they were coming to the site. That was kind of the analysis at first. So that being said, we then, of course, still looked a little further into it. There were some other people on the email lists that were also trying to look into it. And it's when, the really unique thing here, and part of the real difficult part for you as the defender, you owning the website trying to obviously not serve malware, is that the malware is really complicated a lot of times. The exploits, the payloads, all the stuff that's on your website is rather smart, and it can actually determine whether you're a vulnerable client or not, and it has a bunch of anti-forensics properties. So it can actually check and say, is this person running a client in a VM, which would obviously not be a normal client? Is this person doing some type of forensics? Are they doing, are they using some type of tool? Is it a known scanner, et cetera? And malware can do that, and so can the actual payloads for websites. So it seems to be that in this particular case, they were some type of anti-forensics was certainly involved, which is why in some cases you'd get the exploit pack, in some cases you wouldn't. So depending on who you were and when you came to the site, determined whether or not you'd actually be compromised.
Okay, so did you, for example, browse with a backtrack CD as Brad was describing, which is a Linux-based distribution?
Correct.
Malware may look at you and say, well, you're running Linux. I don't have an exploit for you in this pack, so I'm going to ignore you. I'm not going to download the malware.
Right, it has a
then
list.
You go with a Windows system and it says, oh, I'm going to exploit you.
Exactly. You have a list of here's what we can actually exploit. So if it's not these, don't send it, because all you're doing is then you're just giving away your information. So only send it to the targets we know we can actually compromise. And so then it, of course, makes it much harder for the person who owns the website to even stumble upon the fact that it's been compromised.
So did you find the JavaScript that was malicious on the site?
I
at
did
this
not.
time?
The next person who talks is going
Okay.
to speak about what where they actually found that. But so at
Okay.
that point in time, all the tools we were using, it was intelligently determining not to send us
I gotcha.
the malicious JavaScript.
Very cool.
And so after your analysis, you were confident with the other red teamers' analysis, and you felt like the site was not serving malware,
Yes,
correct?
at that point, the outcome, the conclusion was that the probability was that the hosts were already infected, that the site was in fact not compromised.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you, Justin.
you.
Thanks, Justin.
So at that point, I'm confident the site's...
So you went in the hallway and you picked up your chair
Yeah,
and you wheeled
I
it
relaxed.
back in your office.
Yeah,
Relaxed a little more.
I relaxed, took a deep breath, and felt pretty confident in, 10 people who do this all the time professionally, see these kinds of attacks all the time. With their analysis, felt confident that the site wasn't compromised. Turns out, fast forward 2 days later, and in the initial analysis on Monday, some of the folks that I reached out to started reaching out to friends in their community, specifically the Nova Hackers group. And Wednesday morning, 2 days later, I get an email from somebody on the team I reached out to saying, some friends of mine have found some malicious code. Your site is definitely serving up malware. And they posted the code to this site called Pastebin. You familiar with Pastebin?
Yep.
How are the attackers using Pastebin?
Well, attackers will share code and exploits. Pastebin is probably the most common way that attackers will use that. If they compromise a site or find a vulnerability in some software, they'll anonymously put it up on Pastebin and say, hey, here it is. It kind of just puts it out there on the general internet.
So I knew a little bit about Pastebin. I knew that was not good, and I knew that the site was absolutely compromised at that point. So I called a former student of mine and a colleague, Brandon Dixon, and he did kind of the second round of analysis. And I'd like to bring Brandon on to talk about what he did. Brandon?
Hey guys.
Hey, Brandon.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So I reached out to Brandon Wednesday afternoon. I sent him the link to Pastebin, and talk a little bit about what you did at that point then.
So at that point, I was like everyone else. I thought that the site wasn't compromised, and we had seen that the site was actually compromised only if you were on coming from Google.com. So at that point, we had the Pastebin, and it was just a bunch of garbage JavaScript. So these exploit packs want to protect their exploits as much as possible. They want to stop the defender, us in this case, from actually figuring out what was potentially going on. So what I did was I took the JavaScript from Pastebin and I essentially put it in a sandbox. So this sandbox allows me to run this JavaScript code without infecting my machine. Assuming that, let's say, if I were to run this in a browser and I noticed that I was on Windows, it might throw an exploit at my machine, and now the machine that I'm doing analysis on is potentially compromised. So I did this in a sandbox, and what I did is I just started running through the JavaScript, following the code, trying to hook into pieces of the malicious code to decrypt that. And once I had that, it was clear to see that it was either Phoenix or Black Hole Exploit Kit that was being hosted at the site. But what was interesting is that a new directory was created off of the web server root. So the CCDC website was hosted in a folder called CCDC. But this malicious code, there was a redirector being served from /home. So after taking a look on the internet, there was a bunch of campaigns that actually were recently infecting sites. It's unclear as to how the attackers got onto the web server, but it's likely that it was compromised through a massive exploit on a hosting provider.
Yeah, so you don't believe that the website itself had a vulnerability in which attackers exploited to create that directory and host their malware on. You think it came from like the other side, that the hosting provider machine got compromised. That system hosted hundreds of websites. All they did was write a script to throw out your directory in those 100 websites, and then all those websites are essentially working for you, hosting malware. But now if it's from Google, is this like the Black Hat SEO equivalent attack?
Yeah, and it's also to keep things a bit quiet as well. So, the way they can do things is they can boost the links up in Google, and they want people to come from Google because it ensures the longevity of the exploit kit being undetected. I mean, it even fooled me at first. It fooled a lot of people that I know. That we went to the site, we looked for all the external resources being pulled, couldn't find anything. So techniques like that, while you may not infect everyone by going to the website, it ensures that the longevity of the exploit,
Right.
where it'll be able to remain on the site for a long period of time, and especially one like CCDC, where you guys wouldn't expect something like that. They want to try and keep it as safe as possible. So in this case, I think it was virtual directories being being owned as opposed to a
how
site.
was it? Did it magically go away? Did you remove it? Did you change any permissions to prevent it?
So that was the interesting part. Virtual hosted websites are a little bit difficult at times because you don't control the environment. By the time that I got to it, everything was gone. So I had seen that the actual directory was a capital H home, and it was put into the root, but that just ceased to exist. I contacted other people that I knew. I couldn't find anything on it. They said that it also disappeared. It essentially just removed itself from the system. It's unclear whether or not the malware did that, which is probably unlikely, or whether or not the ultimate hosting provider went through and cleaned it up silently. But in this case, it was a little bit difficult because we didn't necessarily have the web server logs. It wasn't something we could easily obtain to find out when this happened, who did it, what country it came from. So we were kind of left scrambling, but it was good that it was actually cleaned up.
So when we talked, you explained it to me that it was a two-sided or a two-faced website at that point. My site was basically not serving malware if you came from direct links, but if you searched Google for the Mid-Atlantic CCDC website, that the hackers were using techniques called search engine optimization, or Paul references some black hat SEO, to get the search results higher in the Google results. And so was it that when they click on a link, what was happening at that point? So I search for Mid-Atlantic CCDC, I click a link in Google, now what?
So I don't necessarily think it was directly related to black SEO, just because the exploit kit itself was looking for the referrer to be Google. So that doesn't necessarily indicate that they were trying to boost anything. They could have certainly laid the groundwork to do black SEO by putting pharma vocabulary and other pills.
See what you're saying though, it was more to kind of hide it from, because you had two people analyze it that were like, the site is fine,
Right.
but they kind of hid themselves by making it only accessible by those coming from Google.
Yeah, so it essentially had two faces like that.
Right,
so
right.
it was good sometimes, bad the other times. It makes it very hard to go through that process of analyzing it.
Yeah. Now, at any time, did the hosting provider contact you and say there had been a breach? At any time, did the hosting provider contact you and say, hey, we're going to clean this up in this way, or here's how we cleaned it up? So this is what concerns me about virtual hosting providers, and to look at your contracts carefully and see if this kind of thing is going to happen. Some of the problems are, obviously, you experience both of them, right? They don't tell you when there's a breach. They don't tell you when or how they cleaned it up. So that really concerns me with the virtual providers.
And what also concerned me is I didn't know how they actually compromised the system in the first place. So there's nothing I could do as a customer to ensure that this wouldn't happen again. It just magically went away. I mean, it was literally, I contacted Brandon at like 11 on a Wednesday morning, and I talked to him an hour later, and he's like, it's gone. So it magically disappeared. And that made me a little uncomfortable as an end user, that I had no real control in making sure this didn't happen again. Then I think it was that day or the next day, then you'd found an article on a website, right? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll quickly brief over that. Essentially, it was an article describing that recently several networking providers had been compromised. I'll leave the names out of the guilty, but essentially that exactly what we described. The virtual directories were, all compromised, and they essentially copied their script across all of these different websites so that it would just silently, infect websites as they came through Google.
Very cool.
Brandon, thanks for your time.
Thank you guys.
And your analysis.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
I think we're pretty close to moving to the next segment. I want to thank you for that, Casey, and bringing up the experts. I thought it was a great learning experience for everyone. When you first described it to me, it's always nice to hear about how people are compromised, what happened, so that we can all learn from it.
Definitely.
So.
Thank you for doing a great job as our MC.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
It.
Alrighty, I think we're ready to go to Charlie in the red team area.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back here to the red team, home of buffer overflows and apparently block rockin' beats. So I want to give everyone a quick feel into what's happening here. So all that good talk about the different exploits happening off the CCDC website, I've been keeping track, and well, I think we've had about 16 new machines taken over while you guys were talking. And it's really interesting to watch this red team work. They're dividing and conquering, like I said last time, but they're also, I just heard a triumphant victory as somebody got something done, probably nefarious. They're keeping a large plasma display up here with the listing of every host, and frankly, I can tell you that that list is growing at an alarming rate. And it's really impressive to watch these guys work together. They are learning from each other. As soon as one person makes as soon as somebody gets into one machine, they start sharing that exploit with their coworkers and teaching each other tricks and ways to improve and optimize their attacks. So it's a very interesting vibe down here. People are moving fast and taking more and more. And when I come back to you guys, I'll be over in the blue area talking to some of the folks that kind of were very confident when they started off this event and like to see how they're feeling now. So, Paul?
Thanks, Charlie. And we're back. We're going to give a little bit of a scoring update on the various teams. Casey, I'm curious to hear your take on how the teams are doing and what the various scores are and how they will progress over the event.
So I don't know how they're currently doing, but if this year is anything like the previous 6 years, generally what you see is on day one, the red team is doing very well, and the blue teams are struggling. They're completely overwhelmed with a number of tasks. Their systems have already been compromised. They're just trying to get their bearings to figure out what's plugged into what. And what you'll see over the course of today and definitely tomorrow is a shift in the blue teams, student teams calming down, getting better at hardening, getting a better time management, project management system in place to deal with the various tasks, and actually doing a better job of keeping the red team out. And the red teamers actually starting to have a harder time getting in, getting a little frustrated. So a tipping of the scales.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Casey, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
For coming on the show. And it's been a great time. And I'm sure we're going to see. So, any bets on when the blue teams are going to cry, bleed, or otherwise have any kind of bodily discharge?
Well, as the competition director, I can't bet, so I need to remain completely objective. So
Very nice.
I can't pull a Pete Rose. So no. We kid that if nobody cries, bleeds, or vomits, we haven't done our job. So
now, how have these systems been keeping up? So, I mean, outside of the expected gameplay, there always is problems. Like in any real environment, a system crashes, something gets unplugged. It seems to me like things are going pretty well. Like the environment is being extremely stable this year.
It definitely is. I know there was one school that had their network-enabled power adapter, which is basically a device that has 8 electrical plugs that can be controlled remotely through a web browser. That had gone down initially, and I don't know if it was because a red team member had actually hacked into it and turned off power.
Gotcha.
Or if it was a snafu. We took all the batteries out of the laptop. So
yeah,
if that gets dropped, if that power adapter gets taken down,
lose power.
They lose everything.
Gotcha.
So they were coached on just going back to the fundamentals and basics of it is there power in the device itself, are things plugged in, and they recovered. So generally I think things are going very well, very, very solid, very stable environment.
Excellent. We're going to get a live update from the blue team area. We'll go over to Charlie.
Hi, welcome back. I have Bria from the Capital College team, and just wanted to check, Bria, how are things going for you guys so far?
They are going. They were a little stressful, a little hectic. We had some issues. We're trying to recover them from them now, but we're just trying to get everything where it's all pieced together, and we're just moving along progress-wise.
So out of curiosity, what do you guys feel like? Do you think that you have machines taken over right now?
Well, I think it was kind of evident after we had some firewall issues. It looks like we might have had some stuff maybe not configured the way we were supposed to be. So I think they actually were able to probably get into our firewall, which is not good. So we're actually having those issues resolved right now, and we're going to try to bring it back up and get them back out of there.
Wonderful. Now, one thing that was kind of relayed to me was that at the beginning of the event, your team in particular, coming in very confident, convinced that you're going to give the red team a lot of trouble. What do you think about that statement now?
No comment. Plead the fifth on that one.
So do you think they're a little bit, your attackers are a little bit skilled?
I would say so, but we've got some skill on our end too, so we'll give them a little taste of their medicine.
How do you plan to do that?
Seeker scroll missions. So we've got some stuff in the mix going on out there, so we'll see.
Okay. One other thing I was curious about, how are you guys handling the business injects as they come into the event?
We actually had an issue with that. I will admit we had an issue with that at first. We didn't refresh it when they were having problems with it. So by the time that we did refresh it, we had already missed some. So now we're on that process again. I've got a whole checklist right now going on of stuff that we need to ignore, that were missed, some stuff that they had tests, and then stuff that we have to do now and when they're due. So we're on top of it now. We're recovering from that.
Wonderful. And the last question for you, how badly do you want me to let you get out of here so you can go back to fixing your system?
So bad, I'm ready to do now. You ready?
Okay. Thank you guys very much. Back to Paul and John, or Casey.
Charlie. So we're back here, and I think in the next segment we're gonna possibly do some demos. We're gonna talk to some of our sponsors, and then one thing just very quickly. Tomorrow, I believe we're gonna have a mock CIO. Is that correct?
That's
come
correct.
to all the teams. So
That's correct. Yep, we're going to have the
give everyone a little teaser for what's coming
Sure,
up tomorrow.
sure. So at 10 a.m., the CEO, Dr. Casas Terregas of the Hospital of the East Collective, the regional hospital that the teams are working for, is he's going to be in town. He wants to talk to all the team captains, get a snapshot of how things are going. Can the hospital operate? Can it do its business? And so the teams will have to interface with a C-level executive,
Right.
Somebody
right.
who doesn't
And-
know.
And that's part of a breach, right? Is you have to disclose it to your bosses and managers and C-level executives. So that's definitely part of dealing with a breach. It's part of computer security. It's part of your job as a security professional. So I think that's very valuable, and it's always entertaining to see how that unfolds. So,
Very entertaining. You definitely
Yes.
want to come back at 10 a.m. and check that out.
So
Yeah.
stay tuned. We'll be back at the top of every hour with an update. So we'll be back at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time to update you, to provide interviews with some sponsors, do some demonstrations on maybe what the red team is doing, and get updates from all the blue teams. Thanks, everyone.